Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the Arcane Trickster. This subclass comes to us from the Player's Handbook, and it really fits in to this very fey, wild, evil, mischievous kind of trickster character that we're jumping into for the next couple of videos. So if you like what we do here, please like, share, and subscribe. A big shout out to our producer for this episode, D-Span. Join him on his incredible journey to better himself. Without further ado, let's jump into the video. The Arcane Trickster comes to us from the Player's Handbook, and it's a real interesting class, but I feel a lot of people that have played it or have been shown playing it really kind of focus on one or two things and really don't jump into the full scope of what you can do as an Arcane Trickster. Again, we're in this kind of concept where we're dealing with the Feywild for the couple of videos, and I think there's a lot of beautiful things you can do with that, because you could incorporate mischief and manipulation and being this kind of almost a crazier kind of a character, and I really wanted to jump into that with these couple of videos, and I think the rogue Arcane Trickster is really able to fill that role really well. There's a paragraph I want to read to you that really gives me the idea for why I think this is a valid point. Some rogues enhance their fine own skills of stealth and agility with magic. They learning tricks of enchantment and illusion. These rogues include pickpockets and burglars, but also pranksters, mischief makers, and a significant number of adventurers. What this really means to me is that it really gives you this availability to be very kooky, very crazy and wild. And whenever you're using enchantment and illusion magic, there's a certain almost disrespect for freedom, because you don't really care if other people's have it or if they lose it for your own amusement or personal gain. And it's important to understand that that's a real strong standpoint for who your character is and how they appreciate the things that are around them, because if you treat everything like a toy, then you play with them until you break them. And that's one of the concepts of the Feywild that really works with being like mischievous and a prankster, because a lot of these things, they don't really matter to you. What matters is taking your own enjoyment from them. So when you pick this class at level 3, you gain 2 abilities. First and foremost, you gain spell casting. It gives you the Mage Hand cantrip and 2 other cantrips of your choice from the wizard's spell list. Now you have a great availability to boost up your damage with taking things like Booming Blade or Green Flame Blade. Again, you've already hit 2nd level, so you have access to your cunning action, so you can take disengage as a bonus action. So a very popular trick is to get Booming Blade, run up, Booming Blade, disengage, and run away, in the hopes of causing the enemy to move and take that additional damage. It's a little harder to do when you have people stationed to give you advantage or to give you a sneak attack, because there isn't really much of a reason for the enemy to move at that point. But it does add additional damage to you. So understand that you can manipulate this. You can do certain things depending on your spell selection. Maybe you want to pick Find Familiar and use that just as a regular spell instead of a ritual, in order to have your familiar just flying in the area, so that way you can give yourself sneak attack. That way you can pick off enemies at a distance. It works really well. I can't really take anything against it. I would encourage you to take Minor Illusion, simply because you can make sounds in the distance that would cause people to come up to you. You can create a facade of an image right in front of you. Like, you can take the backdrop of a wall that you're standing against and just put it in front of you. And it's not like a perfect copy, but it is enough that if maybe you're in a dark cavern, they won't really notice, and they might really just pass by, because they have to come up and inspect it. And if you wait for them to come up and inspect it and then do an attack, you are an unseen attacker, because you're behind technically a wall. So you can do things like that that really sets up this mindset of playing tricks. You can do great things with it, and I really encourage you to do so. Spell save DC is going to be your biggest issue early on, and later on you get something to benefit you for that. So don't worry if your intelligence isn't as high as your dexterity. It's part of being this class that you want to balance the two of them. So you're really going to be kind of a glass cannon, but you can do a lot of cool things with it. And we'll get into that when we get a little further down the line with your abilities that complement this. At 3rd level, you will also gain access to Mage Hand Legerdemain. This is a very core mechanic that a lot of people either abuse or don't use enough. When you cast the Mage Hand cantrip, normally you can see the hand moving around however you decide to use it, and it can really only be used to pick up and drop things that are 10 pounds or less. Really limited in what you can do, but this is an evolved form of that. First and foremost, you can make the hand invisible, meaning no one can see it, which is very beneficial, especially considering some of the things that you should be doing with it. You gain additional tasks that you can do with the Mage Hand, which is you can stow one object the hand is holding in a container worn or carried by another creature. You can retrieve an object in a container worn or carried by another creature, and you can use Thieves' Tools to pick locks and disarm traps with the Mage Hand, so you can do things at a distance. And you can perform one of these tasks without being noticed by a creature if you succeed on a sleight of hand check contested by the creature's perception check. And you can use this as your bonus action, so it does not interfere with your regular actions, but it is something that you have to do in contrast to your regular cunning actions. So dash, disengage, hide, or use Mage Hand. Those are now your options. Now again, you don't always have to be up front, so you don't always have to disengage. Hiding is great when you're at range, just to give yourself a little bit of opportunity to be missed or not targeted with something. Dash is great when you really need to move, and having that as a bonus action really gives you this incredible movement that you tend to use a lot, especially if you're focusing on using crossbows and bows and things like that. This is what's important about this ability. If you wanted to rob someone, this is how you would do it. You can talk to them 10 feet away from them and then steal an item out of their their pockets, their purses, their bags, whatever they're carrying. It's invisible. If you have anything that would cause a disadvantage on a check, not a saving throw, a check, this would benefit you greatly. If you have a warlock that has hex that threw it on and just hexed wisdom, that perception check is at a disadvantage. Say you were a hexblade, you would have that inherent to you. You can cast that and maybe hide off in the shadows and not be able to detect that you cast that spell if the enemy didn't see you do it. They might feel it happen, but they don't know where it came from, and that might be an interesting scenario to play with off the bat. You have the stealth to do it. It's something to consider. Now, stealing an object. If you're playing a game where you're fighting a wizard, you might be able to steal all the contents out of its component pouch. Now they have no ability to cast spells, or maybe if they have their arcane focus on them before the fight, you can try and cast that and take that away from them. It is important to understand that taking things is not great if you have no reason to do so. Robbing people blindly is a death sentence to you and your party because it creates a lot of unnecessary attention and it negatively impacts gameplay if you're always constantly robbing people around, because it's going to cause repercussions that don't progress the story. If you had an object that was, say, incredibly illegal in your game and you wanted to set somebody up for it, this is how you do that. You place that in their pocket and you watch from a distance how it happens, and you laugh and you giggle and you enjoy the whole circumstance. It's a great way to forge documents and get them into the wrong hands. Meet some people who are nobles, who are important, that you're trying to sway, and get something that might cause them to believe that something terrible is happening, or that they've received code or something, or hide evidence on the wrong people. It's a great opportunity to change the trajectory of what you're doing. It's a great opportunity to be social and use this in experiences that are not strictly combat focused. Taking things out of people's pockets and containers is great when you know what you're fighting against. If you are fighting against archers and it's difficult for you to get there, stealing their arrows or their bolts for their crossbows makes a huge difference. It makes them have to deal with something that's taking their ammo and maybe making them difficult for them to take additional attacks, giving your groups opportunity to move forward. It does not do damage. You can, however, shoot it up in the air and drop alchemist fire on someone or oil on someone and set up little kooky traps like that, very Home Alone like, but fits with this theme of mischief and really abusing the scenario. So you can use this creatively, and this is one of those things where the more creative you are and the more situations you can think of outside of the box, the more incredible this ability is. At 9th level, you get access to Magical Ambush. If you are hidden from a creature when you cast a spell on it, the creature has disadvantage on any saving throws it makes against the spell this turn. On save or suck spells, this gives you the availability to really hit that mark because they have disadvantage. Understand that if you're in a situation where you're fighting a boss with legendary resistance and you manage to be able to hide from them, this is a great way to burn through those legendary resistances. Again, you're a rogue, so you want that sneak attack damage, so being able to do that is really most of the time going to compensate for why you're using Magical Ambush. Understand the hint as to where and when to use this ability is in its name. Magical Ambush. You can hide yourself. Again, I had mentioned earlier using minor illusion to create a false wall or something, or maybe like an outlay of a barrel or something around you. It works. It can set up circumstances that would require people to come in. Use Silent Image, conceal your whole team behind an exact copy of the wall behind you, and then use minor illusion to create a sound of armor scraping against the wall or something that cause guards to come up and then jump in and do something. At this point, I really want to talk about spell selection. I didn't really talk about it earlier because it really feels a lot of the time like I'm dex based. I don't have high intelligence. Why am I going to use this? Here is why. That disadvantage, you can really treat it as a, like a -4 or -3 to whatever rolls they make, just as a guesstimate for them to compensate for the disadvantage. A lot of people, a lot of optimizers take advantage and disadvantage as maybe as like a number of 5 added to your availability to hit. I don't know where they came up with this number. I've seen it a few times. I might be wrong about that. Please don't crucify me. But giving something a disadvantage on a save or suck spell makes a huge difference. At level 8, you would have gotten the ability to pick up a spell from any spell selection you wanted. So you can really choose a bunch of different spells at this point. And when you level up and you are able to replace spells, replacing a spell that you selected from any school is possible as long as it's that spell you selected either at 3rd level when you first gain this ability or at 8th level when you hit that level mark. So you can evolve those spells. It's there, it's real, it's not a fabrication. So spell selection is going to be really important to you. You got to decide who you are with your spell selection because you don't get to switch it constantly. Only when you level up are you able to change a spell or exchange one for another one. Your spells are limited, so your choices are very, very important when doing so. Your damage is always going to come from your sneak attack, so don't worry about whether or not you're going to hit damage. If you're going to pick Shadow Blade, yeah, it works. It's a great spell. It's a huge amount of damage. It does add sneak attack because it is a finesse light weapon. So understand that ability is there. It's great. It's done a lot for a reason. Having a blade out of pure darkness is awesome. I'm never going to say no to that. It's a cool concept. The advantage it gives you, you can throw it, so you do have range on it. It always appears in your hand. With the availability to hide, you can keep yourself safe and not have to worry about Constitution saving throws. That being said, disabling an enemy before combat start is incredible. Tasha's Hideous Laughter would do that. Hide behind something, Magical Ambush, Tasha's Hideous Laughter. It just starts laughing like a crazy person and drops to the ground. That being the moment where everyone else ambushes and rushes in, saves you from any repercussion and gives your characters a huge advantage. This is something that if you're doing a dungeon crawl is going to make you so much stronger when you meet those demi-bosses or end bosses of those areas, because you wouldn't have expended as many resources or as many hits or as many like HP losses throughout a long combat if you're able to disable a few people beforehand. I love enemies about and fear and suggestion for things, for reasonings like this. This is what really makes an arcane trickster. You're tricking people into perceiving the wrong people to be the enemy. You're making them like just almost act in a sense of madness. You know, you're causing strange and dangerous things to happen. Crown of Madness on an ambush before combat starts is a big game changer, because if they can't see your party and one of them just starts attacking the other, that changes how combat works. That changes on how they're going to act, because they have to react to that. You can pick one of them and just have them attack, and as they've restrained that other person, their hands are bound, they're holding that person down, they can't see anything else happening. So that's a bunch of attacks that can occur in this big distraction. And you're off in the shadowed area, dark, trying to hide. That works out greatly to your benefit. It makes some of these spells that most people would think are useless or pointless or just not hard to use or not optimal a viable option for you, because you're not using the spells really for damage. You're using it to bolster some other thing. Maybe you want blur or things like that, or maybe you want just to turn invisible and just use that whenever you can to sneak in and out of things. That works. It fits. It makes sense. But you have an opportunity that not many other classes have to force disadvantage on saving throws. And it's best to use these abilities on regular mobs, because the more of them you can incapacitate, the more resources your party has for the big bads in the area. And that's what's going to make you survive these situations that shouldn't be TPKs. It's about smart spell selection, and it's about incorporating the theme of your character. You're an arcane trickster. Mischief is part of that. It's almost in the name. It's fun to do these things, and if you can lure these people out and do things, because an animal will follow a sound in their home just to inspect what it is. Any monster is smart enough to understand that if something's coming down this hallway, it's not supposed to be, they have to investigate. They have to be pulled in those areas. Set up these scenarios where these pranks are deadly to them, and you've become something better than just, I'm going to hide in the shadows and shoot a crossbow, or I'm just going to use Shadow Blade and throw a darkened matter in blade form and destroy my enemies. Granted, it's fun, but you can do something different. You can now create this fun and enjoying laughter, this madness that comes about watching enemies destroy themselves in their own kind of meat grinder. Think about it, use your spells for that, and really encourage yourself to see things beyond the enchantment and illusion as being a shackle to you, and really being an idea of how to focus your character and really let how the character class was designed really formulate excuse me, who your character can be. Let those spells be almost like skills and abilities that are inherent to your character that make them better. Use those spells and focus on the availability to trick people with illusions and enchant people. Making people love you against their will is exciting. It's fun to do those things and get in and out and laugh about how strange it makes people feel and how they're going to act out about it. One last thing in this part, and then we'll move on, I promise. But I was talking to someone in our messages and comments section, and they mentioned Charm Person being a spell that's really not worth it. Understand, DMs, if you're watching this, when a character gets charmed and they know that they have been charmed by a target, there has to be some sort of roll or something to determine what that character's actions are. Because if I was manipulated and I know someone forced me to be charmed by them, I'd be wary about interacting. I'd be wary about whether or not I go after them. Because A, they did it once, they can do it again. B, how do I know if that's the limit of their abilities? How does that character gauge strength of a player character? Is it worth it to chase after them Or is it better to kind of run around to someone else and tell them something happened and worry about, or just get out? How many times do people infiltrate a bandit camp and actually not kill all the people there? Is that common knowledge? Like, it's not necessarily a turn-on switch. It's just, oh, boom, they used charged person, it wore off, now here comes the army to chase after them. There should be a little bit more of NPC character understanding and their own status. Like, if I'm just a guard and I hate my job and I got charmed into letting somebody in, yeah, I'm not going to say anything if they got in. I'm going to say, oh, I don't know how this happened. It didn't happen to me. And I'm going to pretend like nothing happened because A, I hate where I am. B, I don't want to be there. And C, I'm scared of something that can control me. That is a common fear. So really, I encourage DMs to incorporate that and not just use these kinds of things that just, oh, well, chase after them. Like, it's not always that scenario, and giving that viability is going to give your players the opportunity to use things and change social encounters and make them a little bit more exciting and unpredictable. At 13th level, you gain access to Versatile Trickster. You gain the ability to distract targets with your mage hand. As a bonus action on your turn, you can designate a creature within 5 feet of the spectral hand created by the spell. Doing so gives you advantage on attack rolls against the creature until the end of the turn. This is what's really important. Yes, you can be ranged and make a lot of benefit just by shooting someone with a bow and arrow or a crossbow, or, you know, using Shadow Blade and just throwing Blades of Darkness at them. That's great. That's awesome. That's really kind of what this is made for. If you are feeling brave, and again, you're at 13th level, so you might have a few things working in your benefit. You might have a +1 or studded leather armor, so your AC might be above 17, or maybe some magic items that give you something. I might consider doing this and isolating a character in combat, because maybe you just want to be dangerous. Maybe you want to use Mage Hand and for the help action run up and Booming Blade, disengage and run away. It's additional damage and they've got nothing next to them because the hand is invisible. That help action could easily be determined by someone just pulling their shoulder, or when they go to unsheath their blade, pushing it back in a little bit. That's 10 pounds that they can lift and manipulate, so doing that can give you reason to have advantage. It pulls someone to the side, it pulls their hair back or something. They can't see the hand because the hand's invisible. That's really what that's doing. Giving yourself that is great because you don't have to worry about anything taking the hit. No one's going to attack an invisible spectral hand because it's not going to do anything. Be fun, be exciting about it, understand what you can do with it. It's another way to give yourself permanent advantage. So if you're in a scenario where you're the last one alive and you can't really escape, sometimes you got to go down fighting, and sometimes that's enough for you to win the fight. Think about it. It's a real great way to give yourself advantage. It can give you advantage and not put anyone else in danger. Tanks will understand this. Big frontliners will understand that it's a lot to take hits consecutively all the time for the benefit of another character. Sometimes you need to really gauge yourself and put yourself in a position that's beneficial for the whole team, and that means not running up to someone. This gives your arcane tricksters the availability to be better ranged combatants. It gives them the availability to move in and out and maybe take some distractions out. If they run up and hit that and then don't use the bonus action to control the mage hand and instead just back up, that'll give them the ability to take a reaction away from someone and give someone else maybe the opportunity to escape and use their reaction to have the damage taken. So you can do a lot of interesting things with it. It sets up a lot of important circumstances. I really wish the help action in this scenario would give you something else besides advantage on attack rolls, because maybe you could do something else with it, but being that mage hand is causing it, I get why it's like that. And I don't know, I'm happy to have advantage. At 17th level, you gain access to the final Arcane Trickster ability, Spell Thief. You gain the ability to magically steal the knowledge of how to cast a spell from another spellcaster. Immediately after a creature casts a spell that targets you or includes you in its area of effect, you can use your reaction to force the creature to make a saving throw with its spellcast ability modifier. The DC equals your spell save DC. On a failed save, you negate the spell's effect against you and steal the knowledge of the spell if it is at least first level and of a level you can cast. It doesn't need to be a wizard spell. For the next 8 hours, you know the spell and can cast it using your spell slots. The creature can't cast that spell until 8 hours have passed. Once you've used this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a long rest. Here's something that's really important that I think people need to understand. First and foremost, I don't like multiclassing. Secondly, if you did want to multiclass and take 3 levels into wizard be at 20th level, you would count as a 12th level caster, maybe higher. It's a little hard to gauge exactly that. There's a little bit of math involved. But I think you end up at a 12th level caster, which gives you a 6th level spell slot. You won't know 6th level spells in any way, shape, or form because you just don't have the availability to do so, which is a whole multi-classing thing. If I ever cover it, I'll go in depth in explaining it. But you will have access to 6th level spell slots if you dip 3 levels into wizard. That might help you. A lot of the spells that you're going to be facing, in far as facing enemies and what NPCs or big bads will cast at you, a lot of that's going to be disabling spells and abilities. This is more so for the way up to the boss fight. Because you'll fight casters who will do things like Fireball, which you'll be able to just snatch up and then they can't cast it again, and you can blow up everyone else with it. I really gotta say it's a little tricky to use effectively because of the limits on your spell slot, and that's a fair assessment. I get why it's got a lot of flack to it, but a lot of low level spells is what's initially going to be thrown at you and your party. You know, getting hit with certain spells is very, very difficult. If you can squeeze maybe a higher spell slot, maybe you can take on some of these spells and benefit yourself from them. I believe if you steal it and you're able to use it immediately, because that's what I would do. I wouldn't want to wait on it. Depending on who you're fighting, this can be important, or where you are. If you're playing against, clerics and they use a spell that you think is great, like, yeah, you can use Summon Undead. You can grab other spells that you wouldn't normally be able to. Maybe you want a buff spell. Maybe somebody casts Blink. Maybe you want to use that for your own benefit, depending on what you're doing. It's an option. It's very, very limited. I would argue that since it's a thing you can only use once, maybe your DM will let you just negate the availability for that spell to be cast by anyone else, and you just steal the knowledge. I think that works better. I think that's a really reasonable explanation, just so it works. And it's not just wasted. And I really hate the idea that you're a spells thief and you can't use anything beyond a 4th level spell, or steal a 4th level spell. Granted, 4th level spells, there's a lot of good things from there and lower. Entangle is still a combat ending ability. If you can still manage to steal that, I think it's great. But a lot of the things that are going to be cast at you are either A, going to be just direct damage spells, which is great, but there's not any depth to it. It's just hit the numbers and watch everything fall, or things that are going to disable you. Hold person, things like that. Stealing that from someone who can cast it is a very big benefit because it prevents them from hitting anyone else with it. If you make that save, you've just protected your party from having to deal with it. If they hit you first and they don't hit the barbarian with it, now you've saved them from ever hold personing or anything like that would disable someone. That's a key part of your components. In social encounters at 17th level, I wouldn't be surprised if you had sorcerer's subtle spelling and charm person or dominate person or things like that to get people to do things that they need in social encounters. Maybe they're whispering things to people in power and they're trying to get them to turn against you. Being able to steal those abilities from them, if you can notice them or something, is going to be a very cool effect. Maybe you need to use this with an NPC that you're working with to achieve a goal who's going to cast something dangerous or do something dangerous, and you need to stop that. You know, I wouldn't use this to stop cure wounds, but what's important to note is that the spell level doesn't have to be the level that it's cast. And that goes for the creature that might be casting it. I know they're really limited, but depending on how your DM makes bad guys, sometimes they play them as regular characters, so they might upcast certain spells or abilities. So if someone did try to use Cure Wounds, and maybe you didn't like the guy they were trying to save, you did steal a level 1 spell, even if they did use it at a high level. Granted, you probably shouldn't do that, but this really needs some work. I think it should work as like a better or more enhanced kind of a silence for that specific spell. I think that works better. I don't think you're going to be happy hitting 17th level and getting this ability and being like, yeah, never get to use it. I think broadening that to availability just to silence a spell from being cast makes a big difference. I've been in end level combat where fireballs went off pretty regularly, big scale damage spells went on more than once. Eliminating that changes it and makes this one of those incredible abilities. And considering you have to be 17th level to get it, I think that works better, just to steal an ability. Or maybe be able to transfer it to someone else. Give this to a wizard, give this sorcery spell to a cleric, give whatever it is to something else that maybe you're fighting a high level druid, give that to the wizard and let them change the landscape, let them do a high level eruption spell or something. I think that works better. I think there's a lot of things that just should be really talked about, and I think any good DM is really going to look at this and go, yeah, you know what, let's work on something. Our final thoughts. The Arcane Trickster has a lot of cool things working for them. They are really cool when you start looking at the spells they can have and use and incorporating other concepts besides just combat effectiveness. You're a rogue, your damage is there. There's a lot of cool things you can do. There's a lot of ingenuity on being an intelligent character and planning things out and seeing what kinds of things you can do. Enchantment and illusion magic is fantastic for playing pranks and tricking enemies. Causing them to look foolish in front of your party is a great enjoyment. Having them tear each other apart because you cast the right spell at the right time is going to be an awesome feeling. I understand that spell concepts and building your character around certain groups of spells and limited numbers of spells at that is very difficult. It is a lot of time-consuming reading and concept planning in your mind. Knowing your DM and whether or not they do a more roleplay oriented game or a more combat oriented game or a 50-50 kind of split is very important in concepting how to build this kind of a character. The ability to be mischievous, playing pranks, watching from the trees and laughing as things fall apart for the enemy, treating people like toys and just things to be broken when you feel like it, when their amusement has passed, and being that kind of like fey kind of trickster is very, very inherently built into this character. That's why enchantment and illusion are almost restricted definitively to your character, because you can do those cool things. Manipulating people, having NPCs work for you is a cool concept, having them do it, and it doesn't have to be in a full-blown concept. You don't need a thrall to have fun in a dungeon or a cave or an army base or a prison. You just need one or two people to just do what you ask them and what you need them to do, or making them fear random things, or fearing their opponents, or attacking things that they don't need to really attack, that are supposed to be their allies, because they don't understand what's going on, or they've been cause this illusion to take root in them that their enemy is right there and it's really just their friend trying to save them, and enjoying the fact that you did that. You can be malicious to NPCs as long as it's combat oriented. Take that enjoyment. Try to use spells that you wouldn't normally because they can fit you. You do have ways to get advantage when you hit higher levels, and if you don't, there's still a lot to fall back on just between Silent Image, Minor Illusion, and a few other spells that can give you the greatest escape possible, the greatest camouflage, and force people to come up and go through a lot of danger in order to get next to you, and you get that great sneak attack damage on top of it. Your damage is gonna come from sneak attack, even with things like Shadow Blade. So don't worry about whether or not your damage comparable. You will always be fine with damage. So play with the character, play with the concept, and really look at spells. Spell awareness is crucial. It's what makes a character that's a spellcaster fantastic or really just not memorable. Using spells and being creative with them is a great way to change combats, great way to change encounters, great way to flip the story around and benefit you in a way that's great. Incorporate what intelligence means to your character. It's great to be smart. One of the greatest things about being mischievous characters is they're always the smartest person in the room because they're able to calculate everyone else's actions and then force them into doing differently. Play around with that theory. Be that like satyr in the woods that saw a traveling group of heroes and decided to make them go crazy and do evil things to each other. Incorporate those concepts into who your character is, and you have the availability to have this grandiose, incredible character that's smart, stealthy, dangerous, and causes havoc because it makes them laugh.